It's sometimes just so tempting to want to live as we used to live, even for an afternoon.
What did the sign say over there? What did it say?
Police have been policing elements of life we didn't think could be policed just weeks ago.
We're above about 2 metres then. 2 metres apart.
And government is worried that perhaps long-term they still can't be, that the lockdown will falter and fade. The warm weekend forecast in some parts of the country seemed forefront in ministers' minds today. Their daily press conference, the last chance to stop us doing something we might regret.
This advice is not a request. It is an instruction. Stay at home, protect lives, and then you will be doing your part.
We will doubtless see plenty of pictures like this weekend. This was yesterday on the south coast, plenty out and about, but we should keep things in perspective. The magic number is 75%. That's the figure that government needs to reduce our social interactions by for distancing to really work. Google, using tracking tech in our phones, has been giving us some idea of what's been happening. Google data from the 29th of March does show a significant fall-off in mobility in the UK. Overall, mobility is down 85% from the baseline. That change really kicked in mid-March when the PM announced the intensification of the lockdown. Contrary to what you might hear, we compare reasonably well to other countries. France's mobility is down 88%, Italy and Spain 94%, and the United States 47%.
The way the models are done, they assume a certain percentage of the population will actually comply or will not comply. And so I think, the higher compliance that we can have, the more we'll be able to bend the curve. The less that we have, the less we'll be able to. And so I think right now we need to just keep encouraging, the public that these are put in place for a very good reason, which is that we do not want NHS capacity to be breached. This is for everyone's safety, whether you're dealing with a COVID issue or whether you're dealing with a non-COVID issue.
The workplace has been centre stage, with much debate about what constitutes key work and key workers. Our list, including construction labour, is less stringent than Ireland's, for example, but the burden is unequally distributed across society.
People are more likely to be out of work or working less, even if they haven't lost their job, and much more likely to work from home. But the key thing that we found was that these impacts are not shared equally across all of us. People on lower incomes, younger individuals, and people on less secure work arrangements are much more likely to be working less, to have lost their job. And for people who are earning less, they also seem much less able to be able to work from home.
I mean, what sort of area do you work in? But there are some too who have been off, who have employers who increasingly want them back. For anonymity, we've altered the voice of this person, who works in administration.
I would say the direction of travel is to try and relax the restrictions as much as possible. They seem to be trying to return to something like a normal operational system with no members of staff working from home. At the exact time that the government is trying to advise people that they should be working from home.
Your family, your wider family, friends, what's their experience? Are they being asked to come into work as well, or are they staying at home?
There are currently no members of my immediate family who are working from home. They are all going in to various jobs.
Of course, to some extent, the question of those being forced to work is becoming moot, for much of Britain's economy is withering on the vine. Frankly, the unemployment that we're now seeing and the economic contraction that we are now undoubtedly in are themselves fueling the lockdown. This, after all, was a fortnight where no less than 3% of the entire British workforce signed on for universal credit. There are simply fewer people going to work all at once. The lockdown is fueling a depression, which is fueling the lockdown. Unless we want to be in a form of lockdown permanently, in every sense, we're going to need an exit strategy. This is why South Korea is so interesting. Their lockdown measures are far less pronounced than ours, and their death rate is too. At some point, it seems likely that some elements of their regime, large-scale testing, aggressive contact tracing, forced isolation of the infected and those with whom they've contacted, will have to be replicated here.
Lockdown to try to slow the spread, which in a sense is a defensive posture. It's not actually going after the virus. And I just wonder whether we might get into these endless cycles of lockdown and release if we don't actually think of a way out, because the social and economic costs are very, very high for remaining in lockdown.
This lockdown doesn't have to be perfect to work, but it has to hold just enough for long enough to make all the other sacrifices which flow from it worth enduring. Those sacrifices are immense, dwarfed only perhaps by the cost of not paying them, of not staying at home.
Lewis Goodall there. To discuss that dynamic between lockdown and disease and how it's managed, we're joined now by Katy, Bourne, Police and Crime Commissioner for Sussex, Lord Kerslake, former head of the Civil Service, who also once advised Jeremy Corbyn, and David Spiegelhalter, Statistics Professor at the University of Cambridge. Professor, we're going to come to you at the end to round the discussion off, but if I could start with Katy, Bourne there in Sussex. How key is this weekend, do you think, and how important a test is it for this regime of restrictions?
Well, undoubtedly, this weekend is going to be probably one of the biggest challenges for policing nationally so far. And we know that we're working in an environment where it's quite fast moving. The legislation's only been in for a week or so. And already we've seen quite a change and a disruption to all our lives. But we know the weather's going to be good. People have had 2 weeks indoors, and naturally there are many people who don't have that outside space that others take for granted. So you can understand how they must be feeling. But again, I think we all understand why we're doing this, and that collective endeavour is felt by all of us. So the message we're giving is please stay at home.
You've got the coast there as well, of course. I'm just wondering to what extent the police force has been affected by people going sick or having to observe isolation. What's it done to numbers?
With the police, with the actual force itself here in Sussex, at the moment, touch wood, numbers are okay. And of course, we're closely monitoring those every day. And we've planned for this. You know, we planned for quite a large number of the force to be absent, either because they're caring for others or sick themselves. What we're actually start to see, actually, is some of those police officers starting to come back who've been in self-isolation. So at the moment, we're OK with that. But certainly, we've got over 100 miles of coastline, some really beautiful beauty spots here. And the big message is to people, you know, we know why we're doing this. We've been through a lot. People are really, it's very disruptive what we've gone through. But let's not give up yet. Let's hang on in there. It's a collective endeavour. This is ultimately about saving lives and not putting a strain on our NHS and our other emergency services.
That's clearly the key balance, isn't it, Lord Kerslake, of keeping the stress on the NHS down at manageable levels. Do you think the current regime of restrictions can continue for months if necessary, or will it have to end sooner?
Well, look, I think we are at a critical moment. I passionately believe that the effective prosecution of this policy has to be 90% persuasion and 10% enforcement. Proportionate enforcement, as we've just heard, is part of the mix. But we need to persuade people that the right thing to do is to stay at home. And for that to be the case, there has to be a clear, compelling and consistent narrative from government. They have to play their part in the bargain and provide the testing and the protection of frontline workers, NHS and social care. And crucially, we've got to shelter people from the economic storm. I see every day in my transactions with people just how threatening this is at the moment, particularly for those on low incomes. So all of those things have got to be in place if we're going to hold. The evidence suggests if you do get those things right, you can hold on for quite a while. But
how long do you mean by that? Sorry to interrupt.
Hard. Not at all. I mean, I honestly don't know for certain how long it could be. It can certainly be weeks. But I think you can do it for quite a while if people can see there's a clear plan and light at the end of the tunnel. It's definitely weeks involved here, but increasingly it gets more disruptive to people's lives. I worry a bit that we're slightly trivialising it when we talk about it's going to be a sunny weekend. Actually, people's lives are hugely disrupted at the moment. They're separated from their loved ones, their jobs are at risk, and we've got to be empathetic, if you like, to their circumstances, but at the same time, very firm and very clear about the need to stay at home.
Katy, Bourne, the Times have got a story tomorrow. They've talked to Graham Medley, the government's chief modeller of this pandemic, one of the statisticians working on these figures. And he says he's concerned the government have painted themselves into a corner, that there isn't an exit strategy. Now, picking up on the points that Lord Kerslake made about the economy, What is the realistic exit strategy for this? I mean, at what point does the economic harm begin to become so deep that the restrictions will have to be eased?
Well, I think you're probably asking the wrong person for what's going to go with the economy. I mean, certainly my bag is making sure that the policing model that we hold so dear in this country...
I'm interested in your political judgment, though, as well.
Well, it's very difficult to say when is the right time and how long it is. I think what's really important is with policing, they understand their communities and the community you're policing, and you can't have a them and us attitude. It's got to be all of us in this together. It's got to be a collective endeavour. And I think we all know ultimately why we're doing this. We're doing this to save lives and protect the NHS resources that we all hold so dear. So while we're all still on that trajectory, yes, I think we can maintain the line.
And sorry, briefly, Lord Kerslake, just picking up there on what Katy Bourne was saying about we're all in this together. I mean, looking back on the riots of 2011, is there a danger also that the police could be overwhelmed as well as the NHS if this isn't got right?
There are risks in all directions here, I have to say. Katie's right to say we have a model in this country that I passionately support of policing by consent. The riots were a very different set of circumstances where people literally broke well-established laws. This is about people changing their behaviours from something that they would have perfectly been happy to do and we would have accepted only 3 weeks ago. So it is about persuasion, it's about communication, and it's about keeping people with us in this really terrible time.
Thank you very much. Let's bring in Professor Spiegelhalter, who is the expert on the modelling of this. And let's firstly pick up on this story in the Times that one of the chief modellers advising the government is worried that they haven't got an exit strategy, that they've painted themselves into a corner on these measures. Do you see where he might be coming from in terms of, I suppose, the epidemiology of this?
Well, I must say I'm a statistician analysing the data rather than an epidemiological modeller who's making predictions about what will happen. Those people, like Graham, will be constructing models and predicting the consequences of different policy decisions. But of course, what policy decisions made are political decisions. There are a range of options when, as we hope, the curve, we start going down the curve, death starts dropping, there'll be enormous pressure from the public to relax the stringent discipline that we're all under at the moment, and that will be a political response. There will be a range of options available. We've heard about the Korean model. We've heard about where maybe relaxing in some parts of the country might be considered. All those will be on the table, but in the end, that is a political decision because remember, the modelers, their only outcome measure is the number of deaths associated with COVID. That's it. That is what they're trying to predict. But of course, the issues, as we've heard, are hugely bigger than that about the harms, inevitably being done by this, by the protection measures and so on. So it's a much bigger problem than just predicting the COVID.
You talk about that political judgment. That's obviously key. Do you think broadly the political judgment, that balance between restriction on liberty and allowing the key workers and others to continue, has been got broadly right so far?
Well, I think the consensus is among scientists that something of this level of stringency was necessary. It's what's been done in Italy, in Spain, and so many other countries. Sweden is taking a slightly more relaxed attitude at the moment. And, roughly speaking, we're 2 weeks behind Italy. It locked down about 2 weeks before us. They've gone up to nearly 1,000 deaths a day, and now it looks like they're dropping. So our death rate per day is still steadily increasing. Well, that's the reported deaths. It's not actually the number of deaths each day. It's still steadily increasing. We would hope that we are also going to reach this plateau. I'm not going to give a date, but we hope, there will be signs. They'll be done with 1 or 2 weeks. Hopefully that'll be clear. And then if the measures keep up and people keep that discipline, we should start dropping. At that point, the real difficult decisions will start being made.
You've just said you don't want to give a date, which actually anticipated my next question. Is it possible to say, though, Professor, given the social distancing measures and the intended effect, which is, I think, 75% improvement, that Easter weekend or sometime during the week after that is a reasonable estimate of when it might peak?
I'm not going to give a date, but I think 1 to 2 weeks. There certainly should be signs. It should have slowed down. We should be. I hope we would be peaking then. If we're not, if we continue at this trajectory, it's going to be really tough. But it's going to be really tough anyway. These next few weeks are going to be. We've heard about these tragic stories of individuals, and although I sort of count the numbers and look at these things, I'm so well aware that every one of these numbers is a personal story, and not just for that poor individual who succumbed to the disease, but the people who've been treating them, the families that can't visit them. This is we must remember this, and that's why we're all having to deal with this these large restrictions on our lives.
Absolutely. Professor Spiegelhalter, Lord Kerslake and Katy Bourne, thank you all very much for illuminating that debate.